Bonsoir.
Good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very sorry for keeping you waiting for so long, but our discussions were really in-depth discussions and they've only just finished. So what really lies at the heart of these talks, the last European Summit or first European Council? First of all, we've agreed on the principle that from now on, this kind of meeting will take place 3 times a year and possibly more often if that is necessary. In other words, if it's justified by circumstances. So we're talking about meetings of the same type. In other words, meetings of heads of government and foreign affairs ministers. We would like the European Assembly to be able to submit in 1976 the proposals that are expected of it relating to the rules pertaining to direct elections of the European Assembly. Now, the last political aspect is the setting up of a working group which aims to bring together the 9 members in a passport union, allowing us in particular to introduce a single passport. We have confirmed the objective of the Economic and Monetary Union as set at the Paris Summit. We agreed on the necessary convergence of our economic policies. That is it. Thank you very much. We do want to speed up the movement for the Union of Europe expressed in this chamber.
Cela ne doit pas nous détourner.
This mustn't make us lose sight of the overarching aim, which is to bring our continent together. We are often reproached, especially by young people, for not inspiring people to dream of Europe, to content ourselves with building a complicated and opaque structure which is only for those who know the ins and outs of the economy and finance. Well, I say, let us dream of Europe. Yes, we can dream of Europe, and we can inspire others to dream of Europe. Long live Europe. Thank you very much.
La parole est au président.
The President of the European Parliament, Mr. David Maria Sassoli.
Grazie. Signor...
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, presidents, President of the Republic, of the French Republic, Mrs. Giscard'Estaing, greetings to the whole family. It is an honor for our Assembly. It is an honor for me and the European Parliament to pay tribute to Valéry Giscard''Estaing, former member and an exceptional man to whom Europe owes so much. Valéry Giscard''Estaing was always committed to building a stronger Europe and poured all his energy into this. Our speeches today will be commensurate with the memory of a great European and will honor him. But this is not enough. We must remember that Valéry Giscard''Estaing was a European with multiple facets, a European by conviction above all. a European of action, a democratic European, a European with ideals and spirit, a staunch European, and a European who spread hope. In this last farewell to Valéry Giscard', I would like to reflect upon with you the different aspects of Valéry Giscard'Estaing's European career that should continue to be a source of inspiration. We said that Valéry Giscard' was above all a staunch European. Out of conviction, for him, Europe wasn't a strategic calculation or a random choice. For him, Europe was a historic challenge. Even though he was a very young head of state, he belonged to the generation of founding fathers, those who had personal experience of the war and that experienced firsthand the fact that peace can only be achieved by building a united Europe. Valéry Giscard' defined himself very freely and spontaneously as a supporter of European unification from the very outset of his political career. I'd like to mention that he joined the Action Committee for the United States of Europe early on. This was founded by Jean Monnet, and he had very deep admiration for Jean Monnet, just as he had for General de Gaulle. He was neither a federalist nor a confederalist, and Valéry Giscard' was a champion of the third way that we still today are trying to deepen and pursue. During the presidential campaign in France, he fearlessly pursued his European convictions against a political backdrop that was partially hostile. There was the beginnings of hostility against the European project. Valéry Giscard' was a man of action. And he was a man of action in the 7 years which he was at the helm of his country, France. He took a lot of action on the European front, and this allowed us to overcome stumbling blocks on Europe's paths, paving the way for bold solutions. He overhauled the community's institutions, he set up the European Council, and he strengthened the role of the European Parliament. The European action of Giscard' wasn't just limited to this institutional innovation, even though, of course, it was key. He laid the groundwork of our economic and monetary union, first by launching the European monetary system, which was also backed by his friend Helmut Schmidt. I also mentioned that Valéry Giscard' was a democratic Europe, and in this house of European democracy, we are fully conscious of how much we owe President Giscard', who paved the way for direct elections of the European Parliament in 1979, which was a strong act of trust in European democracy and parliamentary democracy. It is not a coincidence that the first president of the first democratically elected parliament was Simone Veil. The president and his former minister both embodied together a certain democratic boldness and daring that had to make the democratic heart of Europe beat more strongly in Strasbourg. I'd like to highlight the boldness of Valéry Giscard'. He was a former president of the French Republic, and he wanted to pursue his democratic commitment by representing his fellow citizens in this very parliament. He was a member of the Committee for Institutional Affairs and later the Committee for Economic and Monetary Problems and Industrial Policy. And he actively contributed to the debates that then led to the Maastricht Treaty. Valéry Giscard' was also a European at heart with ideals. We know that as President of France, He backed European integration and the strengthening of democracy in Europe, especially in the countries of southern Europe. You can't keep Plato waiting, he said. He was very much in favor of Greece acceding to the European community, and then also very much backed Spain and Portugal. And this illustrates one of his deep beliefs, that Europe isn't just a common market, it isn't just an economic project, it is first and foremost a principle, a cultural principle, a spiritual principle, a treasure of civilization, and a principle of fraternity. One day he met in Aachen with Helmut Schmidt in front of the tomb of Charlemagne on the fringes of work pertaining to monetary policy. And President Giscard said, the spirit of Charlemagne has permeated our work. A learned man, a man of wit, Valéry Giscard'Estaing could see and truly experienced the link between the marvelous past of Europe and its future, which he was contributing to write. Valéry Giscard d'Estaing wanted to promote hope. Yes, hope. Hope is the driving engine of peace and cooperation between European states. He harnessed this hope, and he did this throughout his life. He presided over the Convention on the Future of Europe at a key moment in our history, and he breathed new life into European hope at a time when there was the final stretch of European integration, but yet that final stretch was riddled with uncertainty. Those who participated in this formidable democratic exercise at the beginning of the century remember how he was always willing to listen, how he molded compromise. They remember his deep convictions and beliefs in us, in the common aspect of all Europeans. The constitutional text that stemmed from this convention did not get the welcome that we expected, but the mark it has left is a real and profound democratic exercise. Under the presence and constant attention of President Giscard d'Estaing, still paved the way for present and future developments of the European Union. Because they were right in what they saw. They knew what we could achieve. They knew what the ultimate goal was, and they knew what we could all achieve together. Ladies and gentlemen, the young MP in the National Assembly of France actually spoke about the European project in his maiden speech. It is about building Europe and a united Europe. It was back in 1957 that he concluded his speech almost prophetically as follows. If our country and Europe are to benefit from the common market, then this can't just be a place of passage. I believe that it has to be this opportunity and the reason for us to overhaul the structure of our country and make sure that the slightly old mask of Mary Ann will lead to features of a young country. For Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, the European project was the fountain of youth of each and every one of the member states. Even in the end, it was Europe that was one of the themes in his thoughts. He had a lucid view of where Europe was going, and he put forward bold proposals with Helmut Schmidt in favor of more integration, and he spent a whole life dedicated to this. Madam President, Presidents, to conclude this brief speech and before I give you the floor, I'd like to remind you of the very strong message that Valéry Giscard d'Estaing mentioned in his last work. Valéry Giscard'Estaing said, "This project belongs to you. In order to achieve it, you will have to set aside many of your negative thoughts, such as political prejudice, individual egotism, the fear of change, and you will have to believe in the power of great hope that you have before you in order to build one of the great civilizations of the 21st century, built on the foundations of our history." Valéry Giscard d'Estaing turned to the young people and said, "We ask you to succeed." Now, this is a very strong message in order to fight against Eurosceptic trends, and it was a rally call to make sure that we stand united and are not divided so that we can have a stronger democracy. Thank you, President Giscard d'Estaing. Thank you for the legacy you have bequeathed us. Thank you very much.
La parole.
We now give the floor to the President of the European Council, Mr. Charles Michel. Madame Giscard-d'Estaing, President of the Republic of France, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, my fellow parliamentarians, dear friends. The European Union is the result of tireless efforts, led by women and men who are determined in pursuit of an ideal, the European dream that was spoken of just a moment ago. It is an ideal of a Europe that is united, peaceful, and prosperous. The European dream is of a Europe that staunchly promotes its fundamental values. The personal human dignity of each and every one of us, freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. These brave women and men were at times called upon to be architects, were often visionaries, and were always pragmatists. President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing was one of these dedicated builders of the European project that brings us together. A young, enterprising president who showed that value did not have to wait for the years to pass to be recognized. It is striking now for our generation to note just how much the lines of his action sketch out the challenges that we face today and inspire our generation to meet them, to strengthen European leadership, to intensify international cooperation, to advance democracy and the rule of law, and ultimately to place our trust in science and innovation. In Europe, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing wanted Europe to be ambitious and strong, confident in its future. He wanted a Europe which was endowed with institutions that would be capable of giving it the necessary political impetus and asserting its role on the international stage. And he took action and contributed actively to strengthening the European institutions. And we see the results of all of this work today in the form of this dual democratic legitimacy that they embody. We saw this also a moment ago, these very moving historic images when he declared in December of 1974 at the end of a European summit in Paris, and I quote him now, "The summits are dead, long live the European Council." And with those words, he ushered in this institution which I have the honor to preside over today. Since that time, the heads of state and government of Europe have met more than 3 times a year, and in those meetings they've played a central role in each of the major developments and transformations of the European project. In the broad political guidelines that are chosen for the Union. Later, as president of the convention, 20 years on, it was by promoting the inclusion of the European Council in the treaties that Giscard d'Estaing further strengthened the institution. Moreover, as a staunch promoter of the election of the European Parliament by direct universal suffrage from 1979 onwards, he gave further substance and vigor to this European democratic legitimacy. And it is on the basis of this dual legitimacy that we see the unity of Europe being built day after day. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing was probably also one of the first among us to truly understand and feel the importance of our currency for what we now call Europe's strategic autonomy or sovereignty. It was this intuition that he had back then as the finance minister, as under President de Gaulle, that was the foundation on which he developed monetary cooperation in Europe when he then became president himself. And his actions eventually led to the creation of our currency, the euro, which today constitutes a major strategic asset for the European Union. And it is now up to us to give it its full international dimension. Ladies and gentlemen, the actions of President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing were not limited to Europe and the European Union. It is to him that we also owe the creation of the G7, the first meeting of which was held at the Château de Rambouillet in November of 1975. Now, more than 45 years later, the G7, together with its cousin, the G20, continue to be essential global fora, as we saw once ago, just a few short weeks ago, at the G20 in Rome, where we saw that Europe mobilized itself to affirm a global ambition in the face of the climate threat. Valéry Giscard d'Estaing helped transform European democracy, and he also advanced French democracy by lowering the age of majority to 18 years, and also by making major advances for women's rights through the establishment of a state secretariat for the status of women, agreeing the reimbursement of the contraceptive pill and divorce by mutual consent, and, of course, through the law on the voluntary termination of pregnancy, spearheaded by this great lady and great European, Simone Veil, who left her mark on this assembly, this parliament as well. Even today, the cause of women and the cause of gender equality is a battle that we are called on to wage here at European level. I'm thinking in particular about the battle that we need to continue to wage for equal pay between men and women, or also about the directive for a better balance between men and women on the boards of directors of companies. We also need to engage at the global level, particularly to ensure the protection of women in armed conflict. And it is this fight for gender equality that Giscard d'Estaing understood perfectly, because he understood that a society cannot be fully democratic as long as women's rights are not equal to men's rights, both in law but also in practice. Finally, and this will be my concluding idea, there is one trait of Valéry Giscard d'Estaing that resonates strongly today. And I'm referring here to his scientific spirit, a spirit that stems from his polytechnic education, to be sure, and that without a doubt influenced his presidency as the President of the Republic and was affected his actions for the European project. His presidency was marked by great industrial feats. I'm thinking of Ariane, the Concorde, Airbus, the TGV, which saw France take a great leap into modern technology. Let us be inspired by this ambition. Let us trust in science and innovation at a time when we are committed to strengthening the strategic autonomy and influence of the Union in the world, particularly in technological and industrial terms. Let us remain faithful to this scientific spirit and to reason which is one of our most precious European legacies. It is this scientific spirit, this confidence in reason, that allows us to constantly innovate and to develop, for instance, vaccines in Europe that are our best line of defense against the COVID pandemic affecting the world. And again, it is this scientific spirit and this trust in science and this ambition that must inspire us as we face this extraordinary challenge, this extraordinary, almost existential adventure, which is our dual transition, both climate and digital. Ladies and gentlemen, in his memoirs, Jean Monnet writes that if nothing is sustainable without institutions, nothing is possible without men. The friendship between Valéry Giscard'Estaing and Chancellor Helmut Schmidt embodied these words. Not one of the great advances that we have just talked about would have been possible without this friendship, without this mutual trust, without this pair who joined in history the pairs formed by de Gaulle and Adenauer, later Mitterrand and Kohl, and we know very well to the President of France, the President of Germany, and I'm thinking also of Chancellor Angela Merkel, just how essential such a pair is to moving our union forward, and how much it will still be so in the future with a new government preparing to take office in Berlin. Because the European project is also a human project, where chemistry of personal relationships can make it possible to move mountains and to make the impossible possible. President Giscard d'Estaing was a modest man. His wife, dear Madame, knows this better than anyone. We owe him tribute, and the tribute we pay him today is to a man of action. Action for a Europe that is strong, united, and democratic. Action for effective cooperation and multilateralism. An action for a free and modern society that guarantees to each of us access to all of the opportunities to allow us to realize our personal dreams. An action that is guided by faith in reason and the ambition of progress. And the best tribute that we can pay him, inspired by his action, is to take action. At the service of this project of dignity, progress, and solidarity that is the European Union, it is up to all of us now, together, to be faithful to this, and to pursue this every day as we build the European project together. Thank you very much.
La parole est à la présidente de...
I'd now like to give the floor to the President of the European Commission, Ms. Ursula von der Leyen.
Chère Madame Valéry
Madame Valéry Giscard'Estaing, President of the Parliament, Mr. Sassoli, President Macron, Federal President Steinmeier, President of the European Council, Mr. Michel, heads of state. When a man has fought his entire life long for justice, freedom, and peace, he never dies. His example remains present in memories. His discourse remains and resonates in our memories. His memories continue to make our hearts beat. Ladies and gentlemen, these words came from Valéry Giscard d'Estaing. They are his words. They belong to him because he chose them himself to pay homage to another great European Frenchman, Leyen. But also, and above all, because these words incarnate the life and the memories of this a man who loved France and loved Europe. During this ceremony, we will be talking about many European successors signed Valéry Giscard'Estaing. He was architect and builder of Europe throughout his life. As president, as member of parliament here in Strasbourg or in Paris, as a citizen, he always pushed for the cause of a united Europe, discarding the memories of war. As a young member, he was a young member of parliament, but also right until last year he was pleading for an ambitious relaunch plan. We won't forget his key role in the European monetary system and later on the euro. We'll remember him for his support for direct universal suffrage for the European Parliament and the creation on his initiative of the European Council and the G7. But ladies and gentlemen, today I would like most of all to talk about how this man marked a generation of Europeans, including myself, and how his audacity and his ambition continue to make life easier for millions of European citizens. I myself had the honour of meeting Valéry Giscard d'Estaing a few years ago in Paris. But in reality, I already had the impression that I'd known him for decades, because he had that power to be close to people even when they were far removed. As a young person in Germany, I followed the world of politics thanks to my father, who had a seat in the Parliament of Lower Saxony. But for me at the time, politicians were serious, strict men. But then in 1974, a French president was elected who was young and dynamic, and that left its mark on me. And I'll never forget the day of his investiture, a president arriving on foot to the Élysée, applauded by the crowds, who took the time to stop to embrace his daughters who were among the crowd that day. That gesture shows what kind of person he is, someone who wants to be close to his family and close to the French people. And that's an example of Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, a great artist of modern communication. Because he was one of the first to develop an intimacy, a style which accompanied the substance. And with President Giscard d'Estaing, there was plenty of substance, and there was always plenty of substance. In particular, his instinct to reform allowed social progress to take place. And everyone can see the importance of that progress today. His mandate has changed the lives of millions of French citizens, setting the foundations for a fairer society, together with his minister, Simone Veil. I'm talking about reimbursement of the contraceptive pill and making crime of rape. I'm talking about equality between men and women in the workplace. These progresses have enabled millions of women to hold their own destiny in their own hands, to make their own choices, and to feel better protected and better recognized by the law. Our fight for equality continues, but it's certainly easier now, thanks to the President whom we are honouring today. Ladies and gentlemen, a few minutes ago I told you that I had the impression that I knew Valéry Giscard''Estaing long before I actually met him. And I think that's true for many of my compatriots, because he had a unique and profound relationship with Germany, and particularly with his great friend, the Chancellor Helmut Schmidt. Logically, for great Europeans, they met for the first time at the Jean Monnet house. President Giscard''Estaing told us that as he entered the house, he saw a great cloud of smoke, and then only later on did he see that Helmut Schmidt was concealed beneath it. But it's as of that moment that the true Franco-German friendship began, based on a common vision of a stronger Europe, a more united Europe. Right in the middle of the monetary crisis, they met again in Blaisheim, a few kilometers from here. Their complicity was essential for getting Europe out of its slumber and for taking that great leap forward, which was so necessary at the time. That friendship, that conviction, that commitment remain an example and an inspiration for those of us who follow him. So it's with great emotion that I'd like to quote the words of Valéry Giscard''Estaing as he spoke to Helmut Schmidt. He said, "This friendship will live as long as us, and even beyond, but in a different form, because we have the privilege of serving together, serving causes that went beyond us." Ladies and gentlemen, when I look at this hemicycle today, I know that that friendship and their European cause continue to live on and to vibrate, and to take the words of the beginning, the example of Valéry Giscard''Estaing remains present in my memory. His discourse resonates always, and his generosity continues to make my heart beat. So for me, as for everyone here, it will never be an au revoir. Thank you. Long live Europe.